I am very pleased to introduce Ruth Paine.
Well, I'm a little surprised at being seated. I expected to stand, but can you see me all right? Is that all right? Or should I be? No. So that would require picking up a microphone, wouldn't it? I'm not going to hold two microphones.
No, that one is kind of...
What?
Pull that one forward too.
This one forward? Okay, so that'll come through better. I'll tell you what, I'll just stand up from the beginning and talk about this picture first. Whoever got it did a really good job. That was the picture that's on the front of the book by Thomas Mallon. And I think there's some copies in the back. You get to look at what your local bookstore has brought, which is a nice collection of books. This picture was taken the day after the assassination. This is the morning of the 23rd. And I feel pinned to the chair here. Let's see. Well, let's see. You'll lose something on the other mics this way. Okay. All right. We're grateful to the wife of Alan Grant, who took this picture. Karen Grant is here with us, came up from LA to be here. And this picture is a good way to start off because we're preparing to go, the Marina's mother-in-law, who's right here, is holding the new baby. And she and Marina, with their daughter June, the four of them are planning to go to find Lee at the jailhouse. Marguerite Oswald asked the young man from Life magazine to come, so she's invited him, and Alan Grant was part of that team, plus a translator who showed up early in the morning on the 23rd. I'm here washing dishes somewhere over here. Yeah. The significance part of it is that this was the last time I saw Marina until March in '64, after she had testified for the Warren Commission, because she essentially disappeared from my life, my children's lives, going in with the newsman. And Lee telephoned later that day and said he'd like me to try to reach a lawyer named John App, which he gave me a phone number, and I did try to reach the lawyer but could not do so. Then he called again later from the jailhouse and said he wanted to talk to Marina. And I said, well, she's not here. He was upset at that. She felt that she should be there if he wanted her. So after I hung up, I decided, well, I'll call the newsman, see what he can tell me. His name was Tommy Thompson. And he had told me what hotel they were in. So I called the hotel and said, may I speak to Tommy Thompson? And Marguerite answered the phone, the mother-in-law. And I said, I would like to talk to Marina. And she said, no, we can't be too concerned about what Lee wants now. I had said Lee wanted to talk to her. And would not let me talk to Marina, which said quite a lot about Marguerite Oswald. But the point I'm getting to is that Marina left expecting to come back. And she had things that she needed for her two babies. And I got letters that were addressed to her and things that I wanted to send to her. So I started sending things to her with the help of the Irving policeman that was parked outside my door, out in the front on the road. And I think he was there certainly from the time that Oswald was shot, and maybe after that. Anyway, I would take him items to take to Marina. She called me and said, oh, I'm going to need this and that, clothing for the children and diapers and so on. And so I was giving him the things that I knew she wanted and asking him to get them to Marina, wherever she was. And that worked. I mean, he did that, probably to Dallas police or whatever. I didn't know the circumstances for Marina, whether she was could make her own choices about where to be or not at that point. Anyway, after a few days, one of the things I sent was a book about advice to homemakers and families, and she had been reading to me from it. It was in Russian, and as I recall, we were reading about pinworms, an issue for us at that point in Texas, and sent the book without much thinking about it. And then a couple days later, there were 2 Secret Service men at my door who came in and wanted to talk to me. One of them was their Russian speaker, and I could tell that he wanted to check out my Russian to see what he thought of it. So I answered him in Russian, and we talked for a little bit. What he was saying was, he showed me a note. I have here the contents of the note translated, and your very good newsman, Chris Smith, Chris, are you here? Who wrote it up in the PD, in the Press Democrat, copied this entire text of the note. What I saw that the Secret Service man showed me was the start of it. It was in Cyrillic letters, in Russian, and it said, here is the key to mailbox. And I've commented that whoever wrote it didn't know the Russian word for key because he transliterated it. And but the Russian speaker was saying, Mrs. Paine, you sent this to Marina. Oh? He asked me if I'd seen the note. No, I hadn't. He asked me if I know who wrote it. No, I didn't know that. And he was getting huffy and kind of aggressive and saying, Mrs. Paine, you sent this to Marina. I said, no, which was a really bad time because this was the first somebody was calling me a liar, and I didn't appreciate it. But then I translated to the English speaker, told him what was going on and what the other man was saying. And the English speaker said, well, it was in a book. And I personally hope that in the film that Tom Hanks is doing, they will show this incredible moment when someone looked through the book and found the note in it and showed it to Marina. Because it must have been a very emotional time for her. She had to explain what it was. And it turned out to be a note that Oswald had written on the 10th of April, just a few days after he got his mail-order rifle, sent to him in the name of A. Heidel, I think. And he went out to try to kill General Edwin A. Walker, Governor General Edwin A. Walker, Major General, I guess it is. Anyway, that evening, and he hadn't come back by late after 10, and Marina was worried, where did he go, what is it? And she went in on his little study desk and saw this note, which said horrendous things like, this is where you find me if I'm in jail. Don't keep my clothing, but keep my papers. The embassy will be there to help you if you ask for help. If I am alive and taken prisoner, the city jail is at the end of the bridge we always used to cross when we went to town. And she had to explain, at first she said to anybody, that this was a note that Oswald had written that night he went out to shoot Walker. And I personally feel this is a very significant piece of history that has been overlooked by most of the people who read the text and follow what happened. Because here he was, trying to kill somebody. And Walker was a right-wing guy, totally different philosophically or in nature from John Kennedy. And he planned it. He took pictures of the back of Walker's home. And then after he fired the shot, he hid the rifle and came back a few days later to get it. And then, I believe, Marina convinced him it would be a good idea if he left town, go to New Orleans maybe, where he had been born and had family, and so he did. And I came over to visit one April afternoon, and he was all packed up and ready to go on a bus to New Orleans, and he asked for a ride. He didn't have a car, he couldn't drive either. He asked for a ride to the bus station with his stuff. So I took him to the bus station, and then he was planning to have Marina follow after he got a place for them in New Orleans. And I thought, she's going to get on the bus with a young 1.5-year-old and all the paraphernalia that goes with that, and she's pregnant, and that didn't sound really like a good idea. He was going to write her a letter when he got a place for them. I said, well, look, why don't you come home with me and stay at my house until you can call and say you have a place for her, and then I'll bring her down with the kids. And that's what we did. So for not quite 2 weeks, Marina stayed at my house in May. Now we're into May. And then Lee called, and she was elated to hear from him. She said to her little girl, Junie, Papa loves us, Papa nas любит, and was eager to go and see him. So I drove him down, stayed over for the weekend. Not an easy weekend, because Marina and Lee bickered. They picked at each other. I never saw any physical violence, although I heard later there was some. But they argued, and they put each other down, which was, I thought, very unpleasant and not healthy. When they argued, Marina's language was a good deal more facile than Lee's was, and he'd end up just saying, Mulchi, shut up. So it was not a comfortable weekend, I'd say. Well, yeah. I was with my 2 kids, age 2 3/4 or so, and 3 going on 4. And we had pallets to put on the floor, the way you do in the South, and lay there. But the cockroaches were intimidating. So I laid out a circle around us of bug spray. And that's the weekend down in New Orleans, and came back. I'm aware of time constraints. My understanding is that we have about an hour. Is that it? That'll include questions. So I'm going to narrate for a bit more, and then want to open it up to questions, because I think you'll have plenty of them, and each questioner will bring a little more of what I can tell you. I went again, after I took Marina down in May, I went on a summer trip with my children. You have to understand, at this point, I was separated from my husband, and lonely, and bored. The conversation with a 2-year-old and 3-year-old is generally not sparkling. And so we were traveling to see friends and family that summer. Sorry to say I missed the March on Washington. I was in the area, but with my sister, and we all had tiny children, didn't want to risk taking them to a big crowd. And then I went south stopped in Birmingham because it was only a few weeks after the March on Washington that those 6 little girls were killed in Sunday school in Birmingham, the church. And I stopped just because, you can take little kids when there's not a big crowd. And I tried to explain to them that I was leaving a donation for the church for rebuilding. And then I went on to New Orleans and found that Lee was preparing to leave again to look for work somewhere, not specified. And he was all packed up. And here was Marina, by this time 8 months pregnant, had not seen a doctor, nor could they afford anyone because they had not been in Orleans Parish long enough to get free care. And I was very concerned about Marina, so I suggested she could come back with me and her baby and stay at my house at least through the time that the new baby comes, because I could translate. I could get her into the hospital and be there. And I think Lee was actually glad to accept that offer. And he helped us pack up the station wagon that I had. And we went off from New Orleans to Irving, Texas. I'm beginning to shake. No, I think it's the only way you can see me, really. True? You guys at the back? Hey, brilliant. All right. How's that? Good. All right. You're a very friendly audience. Anyway, Marina and I stayed together at my house with our 3 little kids, and then on the 20th of October, Rachel was born, Marina's little girl. We had a phone number that Lee gave us to call him if the baby came when he was not at the house in Irving. I should explain that I'd never invited him to stay there, but I did say he could come out on the weekend and be with his wife and family. And he did that traveling with a neighbor who was also working at the school book depository. So he came out a number of weekends, but then he wanted us to be able to call him and let him know if the baby came. So he gave us his phone number. Well, in fact, the baby came on a Sunday, and he was at the house, at my house, which was a help because I had to drive Marina into the hospital. But he could be there with my 2 kids who were sleeping, or 3 kids actually, with Marina's baby. So we never used that phone number. But the weekend after Veterans Day weekend, when Lee had spent 3 days with us, Marina asked him not to come that next weekend. There was going to be a birthday party for my daughter, who was turning 4 years old, and she thought he'd been there, 3 days instead of 2 the weekend before, and didn't want to overstay his stay. But she was missing him by Sunday night, and she asked me to use that telephone number and call him. So I did. I dialed the number and asked for Lee Oswald, and a lady said, "No, there's no Lee Oswald here." I said, "Well, is it this number?" "Yeah, that was the number." So I hung up in confusion. The next day, Lee called Marina, as he usually did, and now we're talking about October 21st. November. We're into November, the weekend just prior to the assassination. And Marina said, "We tried to reach you and couldn't, we're told you weren't there." And he said, "You shouldn't have tried to call me." And she explained this to me later after she hung up. All I could tell was that she was very upset and talking to him about something. And he had told her, she told me later, he was using an assumed name and she shouldn't have tried to reach him there. And I thought, wait a minute, this guy is not quite glued together. He gave us a number to use, but he didn't tell us what name to ask for, and he thought that would work. And he's using an assumed name. What's going on in his head? So that very much concerned me. And another concern that was only just the weekend before when he was there, he typed a letter using my typewriter and left the draft lying around. It started out, "Dear Sirs," but I looked at it and it said things about my wife. The FBI is no longer interested in my wife and I. He was writing in English, and poor English. And I thought, well, that's not true. James Hosty was out 2 times and I figured just to kind of be sure that the FBI knew where he was, what was going on. That didn't surprise me, considering that he had been in the Soviet Union and tried to defect. So I thought, well, I'll ask Hosty when he comes out next about this, what he thinks, whether I should be concerned. Well, of course, Hosty didn't come out, because that Friday is when the president was shot. I could tell a little bit about that day. It's always hard. One of the hardest things for me is to put myself back in that time frame and remember what happened, remember the feelings about it, remember the loss. We all lost a very important president, a person I thought was doing a wonderful job. And so it's hard to talk about. But I should fill in from that day. Marina and I, on the 22nd, were watching television in the morning. Actually, she slept late. She got up to feed the baby in the night, and when she could sleep later, she would. But I turned on the television and watched the President and Mrs. Kennedy arrive in Fort Worth, where they were giving a talk at breakfast. They were a little late arriving, and the newsmen, trying to fill the air while they waited for them to get there, talked about the assassination of President McKinley. You can't imagine how real worries were about the president's safety. It was in the air around us. It was in an ad that was in the Dallas Morning News that had black edge around it and was really bitter toward President Kennedy. And I've had somebody check on that, my memory on that, and yes, it's, Mallon did great research. He found it in the record. And then the president spoke, and I had a date with a dentist with my daughter, so I left, leaving the TV on because I knew Marina would want to see it when she got up. And came back then 11:30 or so, and she thanked me for leaving it on. She was very keen on Kennedy and on Mrs. Kennedy. And, we were young mothers with young children. We identified with that aspect of the Kennedys, too. So we were just about to have some lunch when we heard that Kennedy had been shot. And then we abandoned all thoughts of eating and just sat and watched the TV to hear what would happen next. And we did learn a little after 1 o'clock, I think, that Kennedy had died at Parkland Hospital. And Marina said, "Oh, it's so sad for Mrs. Kennedy and the children." And I decided to light a votive candle, and she asked me, "Is that a way of praying?" And I said, "Well, yeah, just a personal way I had." So we sat there together. And after another hour or so, there was a knock at the door, and I believe it was 6 lawmen, some from the sheriff's office and some from Dallas County, Dallas police, wanted to come in. And talk to us. What they said was, we have Lee Oswald in custody for shooting an officer. And I said, well, I suppose you have a warrant, a search warrant. And they said, no, but we can get one right away. I said, never mind. We're all upset. Come on in, sit down. Well, of course, they were policemen. What did I know? They didn't sit down. They spread out, looked every corner of the house over. And then one of the policemen asked, did Oswald have a gun? And I said, no. But translated to Marina, who said, yes, he did. And she led the policeman into the garage and indicated a blanket roll that was on the floor. And the policeman picked it up. And I guess my worst moment at that point was it was clearly empty. I saw that it could have been Lee that did the shooting, because he had come out the night before, had never come out on a weeknight before, had never come out before without asking if he could, and he spent the night and then left early that morning, the same morning. On the 22nd rather than the 23rd. These are the things that I saw that made me feel, especially the note that he wrote about General Walker, that this was a man who was willing to murder, and murder perhaps for notoriety. I've read that he left most of that morning of the 22nd, he left most of the money he had on the dresser in Marina's room. He took off his wedding ring, which she said he had never done like that. And my guess is he did not expect to live, and was surprised when he got as far as the Texas School Book Deposit, Texas Theater it was, and was arrested. He again tried to kill the arresting officer. He had a pistol. He had just shot Tippett. This was not a nice man, okay? Now I think it's probably time to open it to questions. You do? Oh, you have a collection. All right. While you do that, let me just say a little bit about the books that I've chosen to bring this morning. This book, Mrs. Paine's Garage by Tom Mallon, was very well researched, and he dogged me for about 3 years before I would talk to him, but then I did for about 3 days talk to him, and he's followed up on a lot of things. I'm very pleased to see your bookstore has the new edition of this book, Marina and Lee, which is by Priscilla Johnson McMillan. I'll picture her here with Marina. And she's an excellent researcher. It took her a long time to get the book out, but it tells so much about the nature of these two young people. I read it when it first came out. I guess it was in the 70s. But I read it again after I had taken my course in school psychology. And it was so clear that these were two emotionally abused children. You can buy your own copy right back there. It's been reissued for this 50th anniversary. And then there's this huge volume by Vincent Bugliosi, and a smaller one that he's got over here, which helps. Vincent Bugliosi was hired by London Weekend Television to be the prosecutor for a mock trial that they did on television. And he was the prosecuting attorney, and Jerry Spence was the defense attorney. And witnesses, the real witnesses, were called to London. Actual voters from the rolls in Dallas County were brought there to be the jury, and a judge from Dallas County came. And they did, it's the only time I know of in the course of history after the assassination, that there was cross-examination, which was very helpful to filling out and addressing some of the mistaken ideas. He is, I have to say, Bugliosi is an author, and he tells a good story, and he occasionally told things that I didn't recognize, like what I was thinking. I don't think he knew that. So he fills it out a little bit. But overall, it's a pretty good book. And he certainly had followed the case from the very start. Now, I'll shut up and let you talk.
Can you hear me? One of the first questions that someone wants to know is, has this experience been a positive or a negative in your life? That's a hard one.
No, it's pretty easy.
Okay.
Pretty negative. It's been very difficult. I felt I had an obligation to say what I could about what I knew happened. There's some obligation to history. I was fortunate, I am fortunate, that I think highly of journalism as a profession. So I was generally comfortable with the people that came and interviewed me and so on. And they generally were pretty good, not all. But remembering it just brings forth a lot of grief for me, because it was so painful. And the loss was huge. The anxiety over the next few weeks, when I wondered how Marina was and what was happening. Yeah, I wouldn't do it again if you asked me.
Will you make a final effort to reconcile with Marina? I know you had a challenge seeing her. What do you think you could do to bring this about?
I'm not interested in seeing Marina. We tried about in the fall of '64. She invited me to come and see her in March of '64 after she had testified with the commission, and basically was saying to me, they're nice people, they will be polite, you can be comfortable with them. But then she invited me out to her new house in Richardson, or wherever it is, suburban Dallas, and we tried to talk. There's only so much you can say about how are the kids and what's happening, but clearly the biggest thing that we had in common was the thing that had been the most painful in our lives. So it wasn't fun to get together.
What happened to Marina Oswald's children? Do they live in the U.S.?
Yes, they do. She met, was it Porter was his last name anyway, and remarried, and they had a little boy. So they've all grown up in the U.S.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a little longer, but I will ask it. I am wondering why, after the Dallas police and sheriff thoroughly searched your home on November 22nd and 23rd, they missed several key pieces of evidence that you helped supply the FBI, etc., including the incriminating letter.
I don't know what that particular writer is referring to. Let me say that the police, after confessing that they had no search warrant, started putting things from my garage into the back of their cars. And I said, wait a minute, those are folk dance records. I'm supposed to lead a folk dance event this next weekend, Thanksgiving weekend. I'm going to need those. Well, that just made them upset. So one of the officers grabbed me by the arm and said, we've got to get down to the police station right away. And that was their thrust. They wanted to go to the police station. But I said, those aren't yours, you know, but I wasn't able to stop them from taking things. My neighbor said, she saw me talking to the policeman, she said, I haven't ever seen you that angry. I was certainly upset that they're just helping themselves indiscriminately to what was in the garage. I saw those things again about a year and a quarter later. But on Monday, or maybe it was Sunday, but Monday the FBI came out And they've had a little more training, I judge, than the Dallas police. And they showed me a little book that's a little address book, telephone numbers in it. And they said, Mrs. Paine, could we have this book? And I said, where did you get that? I've been looking all over for that. And they said, well, the police had it. So the police stole my phone book and gave it to the FBI. And by the time I saw it, it was purple because, of course, they checked it for fingerprints. And that's... So anyway, it was quite a bit later before I got the book back. They tried to reach everybody in the book, which was pretty terrifying to a few people who didn't know they were in it. I had the name of a babysitter where I could call upon her in Massachusetts that I might need, and they had no clue why they were being visited. And then they finally said, and who is this person in Kerala State, India? And I said, well, I've been sending him copies of the Reader's Digest. He put an ad in one of the Quaker journals saying he would like English text to read to help him with English. So I've been sending the Reader's Digest to him. And I guess that satisfied them. They decided they didn't have to go to Kerala State, India.
How did you hear about the job at the Texas School Book Depository?
Okay. That's an important story. Marina and I were visiting with our next door neighbor, and this was soon after Lee had come to Dallas. I think he arrived on the 5th or so of October. And he clearly stayed that weekend. And he clearly was worried. His unemployment insurance was running out. The baby was on the way. He didn't have a job. And we described that to our neighbor and to another neighbor from across the street. And she said, well, my brother's working at the school book depository. You might check to see whether there's an opening there. And I later translated to Marina, who really wasn't understanding our conversation. And she asked if I would call the school book depository and see if there was any opening. So I called and was given personnel, and so I asked, was there an opening? And the man wouldn't say whether there was or not, but he said, well, let the young man come by. So apparently Oswald did, and he got the job. He was clean cut and dressed modestly, but well, you know, a shirt and slacks, and fairly slight of build. So looked okay to Roy Truly, who was the personnel man.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any thoughts on Jack Ruby, his motive, and his background?
Basically, I don't. I think it's significant that he, everything I know about Jack Ruby I've read, so I don't have anything directly.
Okay. Did you ever feel the police might have suspected that you were involved with any of those crimes?
Any of what?
Of the crimes?
Well, sure. I mean, that afternoon, they obviously were very worried. They didn't know who were these people. They're sent out to the place where the wife of the person they have in custody for shooting an officer is. And they obviously thought they could find something out. Oh boy. I learned a lot about what's written isn't always true in newspapers and magazines. One magazine said the police took out 7 file boxes of Cuba sympathizers' names. Well, there were my 3 boxes of folk dance records, my 3 little file boxes of my college papers, and a projector for 16mm camera. Those were the 7 boxes of Cuban names.
Did Lee Harvey Oswald have a good demeanor and attitude towards his wife?
Well, I've described how they bickered at each other, and I think it irritated me from the start when I heard that he didn't want her to learn English and wanted her to just speak Russian so that he could keep his Russian up, was the idea. I think there was real affection between them, but Marina was already worried about the marriage, whether it would last.
Okay. This is, what did one author mean by Marina's going through people? I think that means one by one or using them possibly.
Oh, well, I wouldn't look at it that way at all. I didn't know them when they first came to the States. They were in Fort Worth and then moved to Dallas, and were familiar with the Russian communities in both cities, which are near each other. And I think there were people in the Russian community that wanted to help the family and give them clothing and things for the baby and so on, and Lee didn't really want that.
She really wasn't a user then.
No, she was not a user, and she was very careful to help at my house, and very aware of, the fact that they were getting room and board, basically.
I guess I'd like you to possibly just summarize your thoughts about, I don't know, not what happened, but the effect upon your family, for instance, your children and so forth. Could you possibly mention that?
Well, I have trouble catching them for this conversation. Talked with my son once, who had heard on KPFA from Jim Garrison about how there was obviously CIA and FBI practicing with people in the swamps around New Orleans, and he apparently was fairly convincing. And this was, my son was in California and I was in Florida, and so I said, we need to talk. We need to talk about this and what you're hearing. My daughter probably remembers going down to the police station. She was just 4, as I say, and she has vague memories of doing that. We had the two my son was taking a nap that afternoon when the police came, and Marina's daughter June, so we had a babysitter come over. I don't know really what she thinks. Mm-hmm.
Would you like to summarize your story for us? And
You mean I can go?
Well, and then we'll conclude, and then we'll have some other things happening, including
Okay.
refreshments.
Well, there have been times, particular occasions through these 50 years that the press has come by and wanted to do video or interview or whatever. And as I say, I felt some obligation to history to respond and to let people know. I was really incensed by the degree of suspicion that that we were being lied to and that there was cover-up and so on. And I felt, well, I'll just be here and they can find me. There's no cover-up there. Here I am. So I felt it was important to be available in that sense. I've always listed my phone number where I live, and responded not to everybody, but to some who want to do an interview. I usually, if someone calls and just wants to talk to me, I will usually ask them what their view is on Oswald's attempt to kill Walker in April. And if they say, don't know about that, I ask them to go and read some more before they come to talk to me. And usually they just don't come back, which is fine with me. I was telling someone at lunch, I looked up in Amazon, I put down JFK conspiracies and to see what would come up. And 40 books with little notations about each came up. over 10 pages, so I didn't copy it. But there are lots of books, and more will be coming out in the 50th anniversary. And I have discovered that the people who were sure there was a conspiracy often were burned by the fact that we were lied to during the Vietnam War. So there's that thought, well, this could be more lies. And some very reasonable, let's say logical thought has gone into some of the theories. I'm in a different position because I was there and I saw what kind of person he was. I knew about the note to kill Walker. And it just, saw how the gun was discovered, all of that. So it just made sense to me that he was the one that did it from everything I saw. And I believe he acted alone as well because he was a loner. He didn't have friends. He came out on the weekend. He didn't call anybody. Nobody came by. There was no other contact other than Marina that I was aware of that he had socially. Okay? Good.
Thank you.